6 times life-size, bearing red banners in socialist realist murals. Yet the working-class heroes of contemporary capitalism only appear to have bucked the system. Our rock stars, sports millionaires, and whiz-kid floor traders still don't own the means of production. Here today, gone tomorrow, while the owners of the means of production continue to pocket any surplus value. The film stars of Hollywood understood this as long ago as 1919, when Chaplin, Fairbanks, and others created United Artists in order to own their own studios and control distribution. Marx felt certain that not all the contradictions that developed within capitalism were negative. The proletariat may have depended upon their wages for subsistence and been unable to accumulate savings or capital of their own. This, for Marx, was the definition of the proletariat. But in the factories of capitalism, this perennially exploited class was developing into a skilled and disciplined labor force. As a class, it would have a vital role to play in the next inevitable stage of historical dialecticism. When capitalism collapsed as a result of its own internal contradictions, there would be a revolution, and the proletariat would take over the means of production. A dictatorship of the proletariat would then be established. Marx follows this prediction with a characteristically dramatic pronouncement. With this social development, the prehistory of society ends. Yet for Marx, the dictatorship of the proletariat was only the first stage. This would be followed by a socialist utopia which very much resembled the woolly vision of St. Simon. The struggle between classes, which had been a permanent feature of prehistory, would be replaced by a classless society. The state would eventually wither away. The old market relations would disappear, money would be abolished, and everyone would receive his or her just deserts, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. Apart from these few theoretical pointers, Marx had little to say about the actuality of his socialist utopia. Even St. Simon was more specific in his dream. But an outline of Marx's ideas, however brief, would not be complete without his quaint picture of the heaven on earth that would emerge out of the ruins of Stone Age capitalism. No one is limited to any single sphere of activity. Each individual can become accomplished in any activity he chooses. Society itself regulates the general production, and in this way makes it possible for me to take up one thing today, and another tomorrow. I can hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, and offer my own critical opinions after dinner. I can do all this, depending upon how I feel, without ever having to become a hunter, fisherman, herdsman, or critic. There is little need to expose the dialectical contradictions generated by this Dean Street pipe dream. Cows do not thrive under the attentions of whimsical part-time milkmen, especially in the dark. But more practical socialistic schemes can work in small communities of like-minded individuals. Israeli kibbutzes, Amish communities, and similar efforts provide lasting evidence of this. Yet on the larger urban and state levels, society is evidently too complex. The dictatorship of the proletariat and the state appropriation of the means of production would lead in the 20th century to a very different form of dictatorship from the temporary one that Marx envisaged. Far from withering away, the state expanded into an all-powerful monster, unchecked by competition or opposition. What Marx had not realized was that capitalism's inner contradictions would play a large part in prompting it to evolve, rather than destroying it. Marx was not the only one to misjudge capitalism. None of the great thinkers of his era, from Mill to Nietzsche, had an inkling that capitalism would mushroom in quite the way it has. What Marx saw as the death throes of capitalism turned out to be little more than its birth pangs. Karl Marx died in 1883 at the age of 64. A dozen friends and fellow believers gathered at the graveside on that cold March morning in Highgate Cemetery. They listened as Engels delivered what must have seemed a hopelessly overblown funeral oration. "His name and work will endure through the ages." Less than 70 years later, a third of the world would claim to be run according to Marx's ideas. Afterword. Marx's great venture, communism, has now all but completely failed. Yet the force of its beliefs should not be forgotten. Marx's ideas offered the prospect of justice on this earth to countless numbers who had never dreamed that such a thing might one day come. Quasi-Marxist ideas would be espoused, at least momentarily, by such 20th century luminaries as Einstein, Bertrand Russell, Wittgenstein, Tolstoy, Gandhi, and Nelson Mandela. Many now claim that his ideas are of little contemporary relevance. In detail, his critique is said to apply only to the mid-19th century economy that he analyzed, and not always correctly. But the larger picture has changed, and continues to change, in line with his key contention. Philosophy is not an island unto itself. It takes place within society, which is run on economic lines. Who is the economy for? How can its benefits best be shared in a just manner? Such questions remain very much alive. We are beginning a century where the division between the first and the third worlds continues to deepen, where even in the first world the division between rich and poor grows disruptively wide. And not only wealth will need to be rationed more appropriately in a world whose resources themselves are approaching their limits. Marx sought to control the market. The free market has survived and will continue to do so, because it has not only learned how to evolve, but how to control itself. This is why economics, for all its flaws and pretensions, becomes increasingly vital to our survival. The people who brought Seattle to a standstill during the first World Trade Organization meeting of the new millennium were not, for the most part, Marxist extremists or the American poor. No matter their conduct or the inchoate ideas they expressed, what drove them was a sense of injustice. Others in the world, powerless and less fortunate than the protesters, were getting a raw deal. As Marx in his own way showed, we ignore this fact at our peril. From Marx's writings. Philosophers have previously only interpreted the world, but the real task is to change it. Theses on Feuerbach. Religion is simultaneously an expression of genuine suffering and a protest against this suffering. Religion is the sigh of oppressed creatures. It is feeling amidst a feelingless world, the soul of our soulless condition. It is the opium of the people. Towards a critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. To be radical is to grasp the root of the matter, but for the human being, the root of the matter is the human being himself. Towards a critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism. Opening words of the Communist Manifesto. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. The freeman and the slave, patrician and plebeian, horde and serf, guild master and journeyman, in a word, the oppressor and the oppressed, in constant opposition to one another, have carried on an uninterrupted, sometimes hidden, sometimes open conflict, a conflict that each time ended either in a revolutionary reconstitution of the entire society or the common ruin of the conflicting classes. The modern bourgeois society, which has sprung up from the ruins of feudal society, has not done away with class conflicts. It has only established new classes, new conditions of oppression, new forms of conflict in place of the old ones. Communist Manifesto. Instead of exploitation veiled by religious and political illusions, the bourgeoisie has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. The bourgeoisie has stripped the halo from every profession which was once honoured and admired with reverent awe. It has turned the doctor, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, and the scientist into its paid wage slaves. The bourgeoisie has ripped the sentimental veil from family life and reduced the family relation to a mere money relation. Communist Manifesto. The proletariat have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Workers of the world, unite. The call to arms at the end of the Communist Manifesto. The ultimate aim of this work is to reveal the economic law of motion of modern society. Capital. Migrant labour is used for building and draining work, for brick-making, for lime-burning, railway-making, etc. This mobile column of disease brings smallpox, typhus, cholera, and scarlet fever wherever it pitches camp. On projects involving a large outlay of capital, such as railways, etc., the contractor usually houses his labourers in wooden huts. These improvised villages lack all sanitary arrangements, are beyond the control of the local authorities, and are extremely profitable to the contractor. Here he manages to exploit his workers in two ways at once, as labourers and as tenants. Huts have 1, 2, or 3 holes, and the navvies who inhabit them are charged a weekly rent of 2, 3, or 4 shillings accordingly. Capital. And a rather more typical passage revealing Marx at his worst. The value of the productive capital P is equal to